too quick. There we go. All right. It's working. I'm live streaming now to YouTube, to Facebook, to Rumble, and to X. And I'm not going to take up too much of your time, but this portion right here is fully live. All right. And I'm about to go on with Steven Ben-Nun of Israeli News Live, and I will give a full introduction to him in just a moment. But I am, for the first time right now, streaming to YouTube, I hope. All right. So those on YouTube, I hope you're seeing this because right now, like, this is all foreign to me. Anyhow, so just want to say this. You are going to watch on all of these platforms I just mentioned. You're going to get to see the first hour and 10 minutes of a 2-hour discussion with Steven Ben-Nun, who is an insider of both, I won't call him Israeli intelligence, but I would call him an Israeli insider. Not only does he have a Jewish background, but he's lived in Israel as it pertains to the war right now. Sorry, I kind of skipped that part because I'm thinking about technical stuff. But anyhow, Steven's going to come on and talk about all of those things. We're going to go over the high level stuff and then the more nitty gritty about how many, missiles and how much defense does each, country have and all those things. But the part that you have to go over to Substack to get, and for free, by the way, all you've got to do is go to jslayusa.com. And if you follow me on Substack, you can get the full version of this interview, which includes the biblical portion. All right. This is things that Steven, with his Hebrew studies and studies of the Old Testament, where he's going to highlight and break down some things from the book of Daniel, the book of Joel, the book of Ezekiel, and where he thinks those prophecies were fulfilled versus what may be what's going on right now that has to do with back then. Because he is not one that says it was all fulfilled in 70 AD. All right. So that being said, give me just a moment here and I'm going to pull up it was a live stream this morning on Substack, but here you go, a full hour, 15 minutes. And again, if you want to get the full 2 hours, go over to Substack, jslayusa.com, and you can watch the biblical breakdown. That's the last 45 minutes of this show. Thanks again, guys. Please share, like, subscribe, follow the whole deal. Love you guys. Thank you for everything. Here we go. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining me this morning on JSlay USA. Remember to like, follow, and share. Guys, this morning, I've not done a show in a little while because as there are very big events going on in the world, and they are specific to subjects that I've been talking about a lot for the last couple of years. And I almost wish there weren't these stories to have to report, another war, and a big one. But it's time. We're about 5 or 6 days into it. And one of my friends and a guest of the show previously, Steven Ben-Nun, I'm going to have him on today because he's been doing pretty much day by day or even morning and afternoon reporting on his YouTube channel at Israeli News Live. But I love bringing Steven on because not only from an understanding of how the political game works in Israel, having lived there and being very close intimately with friends over there, strong Zionist. And that was, for those that don't know, that's how Israeli News Live began, was Steven and his wife, Yana, went over there to serve and support the Jewish state, the Jewish people, because they just felt like that was the right thing to do. And I've been there as well. So I understand that mentality. But in so doing, they became very close with a lot of folks in government over there. And anyway, there was a shift and a turnaround that happened. And, the love for the people, the love for all people did not leave. So we're going to hear this from, I think I would call Steven an insider's perspective. He definitely has insider friends. And that includes not only from the Israeli side, but also the Iranian side. And then not just the news, but a biblical perspective as well. Many of Stephen's shows are strictly on digging into Old Testament prophecy in light of the New Testament. Let's dig into the Hebrew words and what they mean. And there's only so many people that can do that. So I'm really excited to bring him on today. And one last thing I'll do before I bring him on, I just want to tell you guys the flow of this show. We're going to go high level and just talk about kind of what's happened in the last 5 days since the strike. Then we're going to dig into more the nuts and bolts of, the damages to each side, what the capabilities are, that kind of thing. And then lastly, we're going to get into the biblical and spiritual perspectives. And again, very, very happy to have this guest on today, Steven Ben-Nun. Thank you for coming on, sir.
Thank you, Jeremy. I appreciate being on with you and looking forward to having this discussion. And I'm glad that you decided to, I was thinking we're mainly going to be hitting on what's going on with the Middle East and all this chaos, but even looking at it from a biblical perspective, I think is very important.
Yes. Well, absolutely. And as people, who are following Christ, that's, something we should always be looking at the news through that lens. I know that if I don't, and I'm just watching the news or podcasts about the news, it can get pretty depressing and dark. So we've got to keep that biblical lens in order to give us the proper perspective. Let me give a big picture real quick, Steven, and then you feel free to tell me where this is wrong. But these are some high level bullet points that I made, and then we're going to dig into it. So over the last few weeks in February, there were negotiations going on between Israel, Iran, and the United States. And actually, it was actually February 27th. I remember reading news stories that there was potentially going to be a big breakthrough with negotiations in a good way. And then the next day, February 28th, the United States and Israel launched coordinated strikes inside Iran, targeting military facilities and senior leadership. I don't know what day it was, but apparently the supreme leader and several top commanders were killed. And then within hours, Iran responded with missile and drone attacks across the region, hitting Israeli targets as well as U.S. bases. And one quick side note on that, I know that the mainstream media, legacy media, and some of your bigger American podcasts do not like to show that damage. And I think that that's an interesting point to be made. So in just a matter of days, what began as a diplomatic negotiation has turned into one of the most dangerous military escalations in the Middle East in years. And many people I trust, like Colonel Douglas McGregor and others, are calling this a war of choice rather than a war of necessity, which brings our trustworthiness as a nation and whether we're breaking international law into question. So those are my high level stuff. Does that sound mostly right to you, Steven?
Yeah, yes, it does. And I think that one thing that I think that would be really important to bring out as well is that the timing and everything. I spoke to a good friend of mine who is Iranian. He lived in Iran, very close to government sources there, still had a very large company there as well, but he had to leave the country. And let me preface this as well by saying he has always wanted to see the government overthrown. His family is from the legacy before 1979 when the U.S. Had caused the overthrow of the initial government that was very democratic and very free. They didn't want Khomeini ruling this country. They didn't want these ayatollahs and this Shiite dominated system. But at the same time, as much as he said to me yesterday, as much as we would like to celebrate liberation, he said he doesn't see liberation coming. He said, in fact, if anything, lots of his family have been killed as a result of the bombing campaign that's been done thus far. But he also stated, he said, if you base it on international law, what the United States and Israel has done is in complete violation. He said there was really no justification for this attack. He said the Iranian government had agreed upon practically every term. They agreed to go to zero production, etc. Now, there's other things behind the scenes that I know about this, though. They didn't really have to go to any more production. They already had what they needed.
Hmm.
That's a different story, but at the same time, I think that the reason why they did this kind of underhanded attack was because once before I was asked about this, what would happen if this attack would have happened back in 2020? The question was approached to me to find out from the source that I had, because at that time I would report things that were going on in Yemen and Saudi Arabia. The mainstream media would only report 2 weeks later.
Mm.
Um, I knew very details. I would be given the images, etc., all kinds of things. When Soleimani would move about, I knew every move that he made. Knew when he went down to meet with the Saudi prince there. I knew what all that type of information was coming out. So they knew that I had really a close hand on the heartbeat of what Iran was doing. And I didn't think of it like that, but they did. And I was told then that if we were to attack, they had already given all the technology and the weapons, including hypersonic missiles, et cetera, to Yemen and other countries around that area. That also Hezbollah factions in Syria. They had everything, and they also had detailed orders of what to attack and when. And so, if they killed him, then this would be what they would follow out. Well, I was told that that still existed even to this day, even with this current conflict. They had specific orders. They also knew that once they thought that while they're in negotiations after the meetings, they're going back to their underground cities that are impenetrable, because we know that bunker busters that we have, which are nuclear bunker busters, cannot penetrate the granite of the mountains.
Mm.
So they're safe. And I think that's why they did the attack the way they did, Jeremy.
And this is really the second time what we've done this within a year, because if I've got this right, because when we attacked the nuclear facilities and apparently obliterated them, according to the White House, and it's still up on their website, it says anybody that tells you that we have not obliterated their nuclear facilities is lying, and they put that on the web, whitehouse.gov. But that was in the middle of negotiations too, I believe, right? Like, it's just, they're okay. There's these good negotiations happening that may lead somewhere, and then boom, we attack. So it's like, that was a sucker punch. And then this one was how, what do you think about that from an international perspective, law, things like that?
Well, I hate to say it, Jeremy. I mean, I come from a non-practicing Jewish family, but so I was very much a hardcore Zionist at one time in my life. Even before me and Yana were married, I lived in Israel back in 2004, between '04 and '06. Been through a suicide bombing. Really at one point I couldn't stand Palestinians, and now I have a deep love for them. Because I have seen the struggles they've gone through. But when I look at what's happening here, and like you said, it's like two sucker punches in a row. And now Trump is starting to say, hey, let's negotiate. We got you. We've already killed your leadership. Let's negotiate. Uh, they're not going to negotiate. That's what I was told yesterday. They're not going to. They already know that America cannot be trusted. And they know that they're headhunting. In fact, I was told that they're trying to kill every possible candidate that would have replaced Khomeini,
Mm-hmm.
not to mention anyone that would be next in line for president. Of course, the president survived, but I guarantee you one thing: he's not out in the open anywhere where he could be killed. Um, and there's a lot more that goes with that, Jeremy, than just that. So we're just skimming the surface right now. But there's not going to be any negotiations at this point. And one of the things that was said to me is that the reason why they believe that Trump was trying to get them to the negotiating table now is because when they retaliated, they weren't quite expecting it to go against U.S. asset as heavily as they did. I mean, they obliterated our base in Qatar. Now, granted, it's close, an easy target, but they hit so many of the bases in the region there, and we're not even being told the full gravity of our loss of life and military aspects, which no country normally does. Israel, the targets that they've done in Israel, they have really done heavy obliteration that's just not being reported.
Yeah, that's unusual too, especially from my background and, watching Fox News growing up, and then, the CBNs, and they wouldn't, they almost create this sense, especially from the Christian perspective, that Israel is basically untouchable. Yes, we got to give them billions of dollars, and yes, we got to support them and pray for the peace of Jerusalem. But at the same time, even the Left Behind books, when those were written about, okay, there's going to be all these missiles rained down, but somehow through a miraculous event, God protects his chosen people, his chosen nation. So really, there can't be destruction. Do you think that's playing in somewhat to what they're willing to show us? Because they need to keep this belief alive that Israel is this sacred God's hand on them place that can't be touched.
There's two aspects to that. One thing that my wife Yana would share with you guys is that in her research that she has done, is that according to Talmudic source, that Israel believes that there still has to be 6 million more that die. Now, of course, that's the magical number for what happened in Europe. I don't deny that there was a Holocaust. I don't necessarily maybe agree with the numbers or the extent. That's a different thing, and I don't want to bring that up on this particular broadcast. But with that being said, I mean, I had extended family members that died there, and so, but they still have this narrative. There's this magic number. It has to be 6 million there, and of course, in their Talmudic writings, there has to be 6 million that are going to die. Now in Israel, which is kind of interesting. Yana made a statement that I kind of thought was a little comical, but yet it's true, right? She's like, it's like Mike Huckabee, it's like all the Jews and Tovia Singer, and I kind of know Tovia indirectly, but these different rabbinic teachers, and I don't like calling them rabbis, and I really encourage people, don't use that term if you can help it, because you're calling a master. And every time you say that, it's like you keep speaking this over yourself. Yes. So try to avoid it if you can. Jesus said, don't do it anyway, right? So anyway, but what are we getting at here? They're literally, they're bringing all the Jewish people back so they can kill 6 million, right? Or at least claim that 6 million die. And they believe that's going to happen from this war. But out of that, now the nation comes to peace and all this kind of wonderful things. And of course, the Christian Zionists believe that it's going to be kumbaya, which literally means arise and come, O God, for those that don't know what that expression really means. But they think that, now the Christian side believes they're going to recognize that Jesus is the Messiah, and they're going to mourn for him because, bless God, their eyes come open. How do we skip over this part, Jeremy, where the Gospel of John clearly says, and the scripture was fulfilled, they will look upon him whom they have pierced. And of course, he doesn't quote the next verse, but it's supposed to be obvious to you, and they shall mourn every one of them as a family for his only son that was killed. We've already got the scriptures already telling us it's fulfilled. So, to me, people are doing the greatest disservice you can to Jewish people by not, with love, sharing the gospel of Jesus Christ with every person, including the Jewish people now, because this is their only hope.
One quick thought, and I don't want to get too off into the biblical stuff till the end, but it's worth saying right now. So I could just hear some of my audience say, you know what, there's no way that the Jewish leadership or Jewish elites are bringing back all of these people, as Steven Ben-Nun is saying, only to have another Holocaust with, a 6 million number that dies according to their Talmudic, strange source or whatever. But there's just no way that they would do that. But I would say to that person, yes, they would, because your belief, dispensationalist, Christian Zionist, says the same thing, and you're okay with it. Because I know, guys, growing up, that they believe that the church is going to be raptured. And then 2/3, now the way I taught it was not just Jewish people. I was taught 2/3 of the earth will likely perish in the tribulation, which includes Jewish people, right? So they're already this small number of 15, 16, 17 million. That gets reduced to 5, 6 million. And then they turn to Christ. And Christians say, all Israel will be saved. They'll recognize their Messiah. And it's like, you so nonchalantly just forgot about the 10 million that just perished, and so I would say absolutely the Jewish religion would do that or believe it, because the Christian religion does it and believes it. Don't you think?
Well, that's exactly right. And what I kind of see, Jeremy, is they're trying to manufacture the prophecy or whatever prophecies that they might have to make them happen. It's just like, for example, we wouldn't have 9/11 in America. We wouldn't have had October the 7th. But if you're going to get a war going, you got to be willing to sacrifice. There is a book that I've shown many times. Me and Yana both have read this book. I don't read a lot. Yana does. I mean, thousands of books this girl has read. But I did read Holocaust Victims Accused. It's written by Rabbi Moshe Schoenfeld, who lived during the Holocaust. And he takes from the actual, even the government documents, the transcripts, everything, and he proves that, which oddly enough, Tovia Singer's family were Hungarian Jews. I'll just throw that because there's another reason we'll talk about maybe later. But the Hungarian Jews, they had worked out a deal with the Germans to rescue 865,000, I think is how many there were that they could rescue, and they had the money to do it through oh gosh, I can't think of the name of it, so I'll skip over where that's from. But what happened instead, they decided to rescue only the elite. They paid more money for the elite, which was only about 1,600 Jews. They went to Israel. They become, actually, Moshe Sharit was one of those, or his family members were one of those, Ben Gurion, etc. And they go into Israel, whereas the rest were sent to Auschwitz.
Hmm.
So they said later in the book, why did you do this? They said, well, we need it. This is literally documented, court documents. Israel's, the Zionist movement said, we needed blood on the table
Hmm.
so that when they're doing the partitions of the land in the Middle East, we would have a right to be able to say that we could claim Israel as our own, and they would give it to us because we had a sacrifice. And by the way, they are our ancestors. They'll forgive us for what we did. So it's no different. October the 7th, the same thing. 8 hours stand down. Listen, I was in a suicide bombing. I know how rapid Israel responds to tragedy. It's within minutes,
Yeah.
not hours. I can drive from the goal line down to a lot in 4 hours, and they can't get over there while it's being live streamed, Jeremy. I mean, that's ridiculous.
Let's talk about that for a minute when it comes to military capability, and we'll start with kind of that point. Is there any connection to be drawn from the average mind that doesn't, I don't know all of Israel's capabilities or Iran's or whatever, but when I look at what the destruction of Gaza over 2.5 years, and I see that it really does look like a demolition site to prepare for, the Trump Hotel or whatever, the Kushner Hotel, I should say, really. But it looks like, and when you ask why did it have to happen that way, in light of what they can do with pagers or how they could do those strikes right into the specific hotel room to take out this guy or whatever, and now they took out the supreme leader of Iran, his entire family. I mean, if you're looking to cut off the head of a snake, I guess it would be him in Iran. Um, is there a connection or a disconnection to be drawn that is logical when someone says, if you could do that with these precision strikes, then obviously something's wrong with how October 7th was responded to, as well as the 2.5 year response and the number of deaths of innocent Palestinians? Is How should we look at that?
Okay, you brought up a fascinating point. That's what I love about when someone interviews me, because it brings more out of me that I remember that I may not remember when I'm doing my own broadcast, because there's no interaction with anyone. Yes, the answer would be yes to that, because we know this. Golani, who was at the time was the defense minister of Israel, admitted that they had also planted in the radio devices that Hamas had the same devices that were in the pagers in Hezbollah. And some people might say, well, how in the world, why would Hezbollah buy pagers that are already rigged, or even Hamas, right? Well, it was done. Oddly enough, my same Iranian source told me how it was done. He said they were actually, uh, the Iranians had those. They were manufactured and built in Iran, and they were built with the patent devices that were put in them so that they would explode with a little bit of shrapnel that would cause severe damage or death. And that's why Hezbollah received them. the Israelis have so much Mossad intelligence and people that were willing to manufacture over there that they trusted that this was a good device, that it wasn't, that it couldn't be, that it would be safe. And the same thing Hamas had. Hamas had it in their walkie talkies. They didn't have the pager systems like Hezbollah did. And Hezbollah had switched to pagers because of the risk of radios.
Mm.
But Hamas was still using radios. So they said, I think it was Golani that I actually listened to, and I could be wrong on the source on that from Israel, but I distinctly remember that being brought up. We could have done this to Hamas as well, but we chose instead to take a different tactic. Well, the different tactic was this whole idea to begin with was to kill as many of the Israelis as they could. They knew already there were 250 were going to be taken as captives. They knew the number of that. And the only one, according to the Israeli source, that wrote me the very next day, that sent me a detailed letter that was part of the brigade that was attacked by Hamas. But he had already left the brigade at that time, but he was very intimate with the Sederot community. Was he said to me in there that that it was only the Navy that did not get the stand down order. So all of the Hamas militants that were making the attack by sea and coming on versus the ones that were coming by air over the fence and the breach of the fence, they were all killed. He said every one of those were annihilated.
Wow.
He said, "You mean to tell me they can't annihilate the rest of them that were coming in?" Sure, they could have. And of course, they could have taken out Hamas, the majority of Hamas, just by the radios themselves.
Yeah. So you believe, and then we'll leave this point, that this whole thing with October 7th was done as a justification to go in and basically bulldoze that land using bombs so that it's uninhabitable, and now they can take with it and do what they want.
Yeah, yes, and that kind of goes back to, if you remember, what did Netanyahu say when he was trying to justify this war?
This is
You
our
must remember Amalek,
Oh,
right?
yes.
Remember his statement? Don't forget what Amalek did. Now, according to the biblical narrative, Amalek was to be annihilated.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that was my very first post I ever wrote about on Substack, was about what Netanyahu said that day. And I literally traced the lineage of the only sole surviving heir, which was Hadad from Esau. Amalek is from, he was one of the sons of Esau, and Hadad was one of his grandsons that survived and eventually becomes the king of Israel, marries into the Hashmonean dynasty. King Herod the Great kills his own sons, kills his wife, but his grandsons he kept alive. But once that makes full circle through the Khazarian Empire and back down again, Amalek ends up being the modern day Pharisees of today, not the Palestinian people. So, but even so, though, once Christ came, that his covenant, bringing in a new covenant, all those so-called orders are over now.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Yeah.
different thought to
I don't think
consider.
Netanyahu cares very much about all that.
No, he
In
doesn't.
terms of the new covenant. But Mike Huckabee should, and Mike Huckabee pretends not to know what Netanyahu means when he says Amalek. He's either the most naive man on the planet, or he is totally lying. And I think that's why he was hired to do that job, either naivete or just a hireling, going to do whatever they say.
Hireling would be my best bet.
Okay. That is so sad. All right. So
Yes.
let's get on to the capabilities here. Christians who support Israel do not want to believe that Israel would target something like a school, a girls' school. I don't know whether it was targeted or not. Can you talk to me a little bit about the damage on both sides? Let's start with Iran. So aside from the supreme leader being taken out, and people have seen bombs go off, but they don't know what that means. At least I don't exactly. Tell me about the damage to Iran from our forces and Israel's forces first, and then let's shift it.
Right. Israel and the United States have very similar technology. Israel does have advantages over us, and likewise, we have advantages over them. Of course, Israel pretty much has stolen a lot of our technology and brought it back to Israel, or they'll take and enhance it, like the our stealth planes that they have now, or the F-16. The F-16 that Israel has compared to our F-16 is even more advanced than what ours is, because they are some brilliant minds in what their capabilities are. And of course, when we get into bombs and things like that, if you remember the Beirut bombing, and, of course, they want to say that that was Hezbollah that did it. Well, friends that I have in the Mossad arena there in Israel uh, got really angry one day at Russia because Russia, their support of Syria and Bashar al-Assad and Israel, which quite frankly to me is that's another issue altogether that's controlled by Israel in another indirect way. But he was so angry, he said that we will do to Latvia, which is the Russian air base in northern Syria, there, as the same way we did with Beirut. So I kind of pushed him a bit for that. I said, all right, if you did what was with Beirut, I said, I'm assuming that was a tungsten rod. He said, no, it was not a tungsten rod. He said, we have a technology, one particular bomb. He said that can do what a nuclear bomb can do without the radioactive uh, fallout from that. He would not elaborate further than that. He said, so yes, we can do some mega damage when we really want to.
Yeah.
He said, now granted, it was a weapon depot, so yes, it had even more impact. And I had a good friend of mine that lived right there in Beirut when that happened. And she sent me a picture of her living room there because they lived in a high rise. And she said, Steve, if it wasn't for the grace of God that I walked out of the room with my daughter that day, I would have died. She says, and I live a mile away from the blast, and it blew all the windows out in my apartment building.
Which year of Beirut bombing are we talking about?
Let me see here.
Is this the old attack of '83, or are you
Oh
talking about
no, it's newer.
the new? Okay,
That was, uh, yeah, you want to look at the one that was, there we go. I think that's the one you got there, Jeremy, there.
yeah,
If you'll
2020.
notice there too, right, it's almost like a mushroom cloud that this produced. That's why some people wondered if it wasn't like a tactical nuke or something like that. I know some people slowed down a frame. It looked like a tungsten rod, which is something we use from satellites that can drop down. It's just like basically a super strong steel rod that when it hits the earth, the kinetic energy is so massive.
Right.
But when you see the devastation in that port area, it was massive.
Mm.
And they said flat out, we'll do it again. Now, Israel has also the Hannibal doctrine. And the Hannibal doctrine is if you're being taken hostage, they just kill the hostage in you as well. That's their Hannibal doctrine. They used that in the October 7th war. And a lot of Israelis died. When they talk about, well, the Hamas burnt our kids and everything. No, that was the Israeli tanks that did it. The type of weaponry they were using, that's exactly what it does. That's why you'd see mothers holding the baby and they'd be burnt to death. So Israel is willing to do some of the most craziest radical things that you could ever imagine because this goes back to, and Yana is really better on this subject here, but the Frankist Sabbatean doctrine is it's an old doctrine from the days of one of the rabbis in Turkey
Hmm.
that promoted this ideology that you have to do more evil in order for the Messiah to come. And that's something that Chabad Rebbe Menachem Schneerson had stated. And I caught it when I was listening to Netanyahu meeting with him. And for those that don't know, Netanyahu has actually worked at a furniture company in the United States making, uh, I forget what it was that he was doing now, but he made a decent salary, but he was willing to go back to Israel and become a pauper, but it was because they had him planned to be, the prime minister in the future. But anyway, he meets with Schneerson. He's already, at that time, I think he was something along some kind, I think he was ambassador to the United States at the time. And he says to him, he says, what are you doing to bring the coming of the Messiah?
Yep.
And he says, I'm trying, Rebbe. And he says, you're not doing enough. You need to do more. What he's talking about is the Frankist doctrine. You need to create havoc in that part of the world. You need to cause turmoil. The more you can cause, that'll bring the Messiah. Now, maybe this man really genuinely, sincerely believed it and what he's saying there. Which, oh gosh, that's another one, Jeremy, that I just ran across. I was telling Yana about, and that was that, during the Holocaust, the one group that the Germans protected was the Chabad Lubavitch High Command.
That's unbelievable.
They were on a first class seating in the train going to Germany before they were evacuated and moved to another part of Europe for their safety. The Chabad Lubavitch, and it was the chief Rebbe and them that were protected from anything that would happen to them.
Nothing surprises me anymore. Okay, so when I'm going to pull up Google Earth real quick because I think this helps everybody visualize kind of what we're dealing with. Hang on just a second. Let me change
Okay.
that. Okay. All right. So can you see my little pointer there?
Yes, I do.
But yeah, so I'm kind of outlining Iran, which is very, very large in this area in comparison to little bitty Israel right here. Okay. So
Yes.
people see that and they think, gosh, like how could they compete? Well, you know, Israel has the backing of the West. They've got the backing of the United States. You have already detailed, and we have already detailed their intelligence capability through Mossad, through the advanced weaponry, all the drones, all the things they have is pretty unbelievable. I have a hard time, Stephen, believing, even though I hear from people like Colonel Douglas McGregor or this other colonel that I recently featured one of his videos. It was Lieutenant Colonel Daniel Davis. He's been doing really good breakdowns from a guy that's been, just a long time veteran with 4 different deployments over there. They're like, we've got a good chance to lose this war, and I'm just thinking, I don't see that. I mean, I think Israel, they're showing how powerful they are. They're showing how deceptive they are. They've got most of America still deceived. I'm not saying by any means that Iran is the good guy in this, but I am saying it when you talk about people who could enter this war, sometimes I forget Russia and China, but I think their interest is to have this thing go away because they use Iran, but they also kind of use the United States and other. It's hard for me to nail down. You can tell I get flustered thinking about it, but I feel like military might and capabilities you would put to the West. So Israel, the U.S., the others. But Iran has this battery of weapons. And what these colonels keep saying is, we're going to run out of the ability to defend against the missiles before they run out of the missiles. That's kind of generally what I keep hearing. So what does that mean to you? How would you break this down?
Well, he's absolutely right, actually. And I can tell you from intel that I had on 2 sides there. I've got one friend, and I don't think he'd want me to call his name, but he works closer with the Ukraine theater than with Iran. But because of his contacts that he has, he's pretty accurate on it, and it was confirmed too with my Iranian source. But he said when we were in the last time when we bombed Iran and Iran began to retaliate on Israel, he said that we were only a couple of days, or I should say we, when I say we, Israel was only a couple of days of running out of the capability to knock down these missiles. They didn't have enough Patriot missiles to be able to withstand much more campaign. And so they needed to bring this to an end as quickly as they could because this had become a very strategic nightmare for Israel if they didn't stop this pretty rapidly. And I think that's one reason why we also moved a couple of THAAD systems into the region as well, was because of some of what Iran's capabilities really are. And at the same token, now Iran, as I was told yesterday, Iran did not invest in anti-aircraft like they should have. He said that was really Iran's weak point. They invested in missiles, yes. They've invested in the underground military cities that are called missile launching cities that are from under the granite cities there. He said there's actually 50 of those. I know Iran boasts that they had more than 100, but he said, no, there's only 50 of them. He said, but still, they're throughout the entire country. And he said it's a slower process of launching weapons, but you can actually find Iran did post one of these. They actually posted 2 of them. I take that back. They have one that launches nothing but drones, and not the type of drones you're accustomed to seeing that look like a triangle, but these are their more advanced drones that are meant to take out ships. And so they do have this amazing technology to be able to continue a very long campaign of war. And what I was told too yesterday is that they're trying to run them out of enough stockpiles to defend themselves. And once they can do that, then they're going to break all HELL loose on Israel. And not to mention, Israel's already been hit mega
Okay.
hard,
To
and
explain mega
and
hard.
a lot of yeah.
Because when I see Tel Aviv get bombed or Jerusalem get bombed, that's the shocking moment when you're like, okay, they were able to get through with a rather large missile, and it looks hypersonic. But that's one. I've seen one video of that. What is the extent of the damage in Israel right now?
What the way yesterday I was told that the Iranians are able to see from satellite view too, just to see how much what their success has been. They did target also Dimona. Now they targeted actually the research facility where they make their nuclear weapons at. I don't think they were going for the power plant itself. They targeted that. They in Tel Aviv and in Haifa both they've hit. Tel Aviv has really gotten more. Even high rises. I've actually been able to find some of the imagery there where high rises have been just totally decimated. Some of the bombs are so powerful. In one case, it blew a car from off the ground about 6 stories up into the air onto the roof of the building. Israel is doing everything they can to block as much images as they can coming out because they don't want people to know the extent. But on the northern side of Tel Aviv, going into a place called Netanya, Netanya is where Shin Bet and Mossad both have their headquarters. They naturally have targeted all of those areas as well. And and have caused just tremendous devastation. I've seen a lot of apartment buildings as well that have been just leveled to the ground.
Let me ask you a question.
Uh,
See this picture right here that I've got pulled up? So I've heard
yes,
a thing. Now I don't know if this is a photography issue. It almost looks like one of those phosphorus bombs that Israel was raining down on Gaza, causing the burns. But is this one of those Iranian missiles that can spray out into those wide net type groups that are they couldn't use a anti missile defense system on this because it's scattered. It's like a scatter shot. Is that what I'm looking at?
I haven't seen this particular image, but I have seen a couple of those that they have fired. And these are actually, by the way, they're not developed by Iran, they're developed by China. China has developed missiles that right when they get close, they disperse up to a dozen different warheads at one time. And yes, that makes it nearly impossible for whether it be the David Sling or the Patriot. You just can't shoot fast enough to be able to stop them. So you can actually use more of a conventional type of weaponry to strike inside of Israel there, to where more of those are going to hit their targets when they go down. Now the bad thing is when you're using that type of weaponry, I don't know enough to know whether or not each particular warhead has got a guided direction to where it's going to hit a specific target or not. But like in the hypersonics, et cetera, they have very good capabilities, just like the United States or Israel does. But same thing with Russia. China is really the main key player that develops this type of technology. Even Russia's supersonics, they didn't develop it. It all came from China.
Okay.
And China is going to continue to rearm Iran as well. They did it right before the war started. And they'll continue to do so. I've been told that they're anticipating another supply of weapons from China here in the next week or so.
I've got so many questions. Is there
You ask away. I got the time.
is there a chance, Stephen, that Israel could continue? And I know you've kind of already answered this, but I just have a hard time picturing it. The Wailing Wall and all these old sites, and could that? Does Iran have the capability to make all of that look like Gaza looks right now? Is there a chance of that happening, barring the use of a nuclear weapon? Okay, I'm not talking about nukes, but I'm saying, is there a chance that they could get bombarded to the points like, 40% of our landmass is just destroyed?
I don't think I would have to say no. And the only reason I say that is because, from what I was told yesterday, is that Iran only has 200 mobile launchers left, and those are being hit pretty regularly. Other than that, everything has to come from the underground cities where they can deploy the missiles through the holes in the roof of these cities there. And that's what they've been doing for the most part. Now, they are still able to launch quite a large number of these missiles, even with that particular technology there. But we have to think about, like in the case of Gaza, it's taken them 2 years to really level Gaza. So being able to pull something like that off in a week or so, I don't see it happening. But there again, some of the size of the weapons that they're using are causing so much damage in a wide spread. I mean, you can take out a block easily. So if you get enough of those, if for some reason Israel falls behind, they don't have enough, defensive capabilities, and that becomes a shortage, which is what they're trying to do, is to wear them out like that. Then they start firing these missiles in, and then it's going to be a lot more loss of life. And the other problem is too for Israel is they've been penetrating the bunker busters and or the bunkers that they have there. In fact, one family in Beit
Wait,
Shean,
wait,
not
you
Beit
just so I'm
Shean,
clear here, because people when they hear bunker bust, they think of Iran's hiding. You're talking about Israel's bunkers.
yeah, Israel's bunkers. Israel's bunkers have been penetrated by Iran technology. And I say Iran technology, whether they got it from China or whatever, but the missiles that they're using. There was a safe room, for example, and I lived in an apartment one time with a safe room, and you'd think the thing is practically impenetrable, 1 inch thick window shields of steel and things like that. But when you're dealing with bombs like what they're dropping, they don't hold up. When they killed the 7 Israeli generals that were meeting, I think day before yesterday, they used a hypersonic missile, and that hypersonic missile penetrated everything they were under and killed. They're saying now up to 10 Israeli generals were killed in one hit. This is because they believe that they're somewhat safe, but Israel's starting to learn that they're not so safe, and they've really gone after a lot of their assets in the region, and including Jordan. They've been hitting Jordan bases in Jordan as well.
Let's speak clearly on this, because on the one hand, you say Israel's starting to learn. Now, maybe these generals that died, or maybe some mid-level people, but on the one hand, you've got this deep-rooted spiritual Talmudic idea that there's got to be another Holocaust. There's got to be another big loss of life of the Jewish people in order to bring about our Messiah, or whatever their plan is. So some of this could be also like this is part of the plan, right? It's not like we're taken off guard. We
Yes.
want to strike Iran. We know we're going to get hit back. We've got Trump under our wing doing whatever we want him to do. Do you think it's so? My question is, do you think it's more actual like, whoa, we didn't know Iran could do this? Wow, what a bad move that we struck them when or, yep, this is what we knew would happen.
Well, they kind of want one thing I have known about for a long time is that Tel Aviv, they don't mind sacrificing Tel Aviv. This is why Tel Aviv and I'm not here to bash any particular people by saying this, but it is considered the gay capital of the world.
Mm-hmm.
And oddly enough, Netanyahu has embraced this community, and which was really kind of odd, right? You'd think, well, what would they do that? There again, what is it? It's that Frankist doctrine. So they bring large numbers there, which there is a lot of Orthodox there as well. But the thing is, it's also the secular side of Israel. It's
Yep.
where all the people that live that are against Netanyahu. So if they're going to sacrifice somebody, they're going to sacrifice the Jewish people they don't really care for in the first place.
It's the same,
Just let them get wiped
right?
out. So it all looks Talmudic fulfillment.
Yeah. The music festival, I've heard the very same thing. On October 7th, they moved that music festival right there on that border, gave it easy access to Hamas. And those were all the people who would protest against the Likud party. I mean, these were your very hardcore leftist liberals of Israel, right? For the most part.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
And the odd thing is, right, when this all happened and I first began to report, some of the best sources that I had in Israel that would admit and they would agree this is definitely an inside job. But as this began to really escalate, now they knew we have 250 hostages, and they didn't know that this was all predetermined. These things began to come out later. But some of the people that I knew over there, now they said, look, Steve, all right, I know it's an inside job, but we got to pull together because we've been attacked. We've lost X
Yep.
number of thousands of people. We got to go after Hamas. But look, when Israeli snipers are shooting little kids right between their eyes, so to speak, or in the head or throat shots, things like that, a sniper knows what he's shooting at. I mean, I worked with the government years ago. Won't go into that, but I did, and I also worked law enforcement. I was a master of arms. I was an incredible shot. I didn't miss my target, but when I put my target in a scope, I knew what that target was.
Yeah.
And so for Israel to say, or to try to play this off, oh, that's an accident. No, that was just somebody standing nearby. That's totally nonsense.
Yeah.
The whole thing is, when I lived there, I had actually a friend of mine that was IDF, and he would tell me about how they would target practice on Palestinians, and I couldn't believe my ears. I mean, even though at the time I was pro-Zionist, I didn't like the idea of somebody just being killed just because you want to target practice.
Hmm. Was that
And
one of your defining moments, that hearing those things along the way, that it's sort of like you get bumped and bumped and bumped away from just supporting Israel blindly or Zionism. That's what happened to me. I would discover these things that were like I couldn't say it was a small thing, and it would bump me off of that hardcore belief in Zionism until, I am what I am now, which is I don't hate the Jewish people, but I sure hate what that country is doing and allowing to happen.
right. And each one of those things had a defining impact on me. So I think it was over the time. Even the suicide bombing, it was an 18-year-old girl that came down the sidewalk with me. And if it wasn't for, this battle going on in my mind, you need to turn around and go the other way. Literally it was the Holy Spirit. And I didn't realize it at the time. Why did you go this way? You should have went this way here. And it was the way I hated to go. Right. So finally I get so frustrated. I'm like, okay, I'll go that way then. But if it hadn't happened, I would have died right along with her.
Wow.
And but at the same time, I kept thinking, then why would this young girl take her own life just to kill Jewish people? I had a hard time wrapping my head around that. But then I started to think differently towards Palestinians. I didn't hate them as the way I at one time, and I don't want to say I really actually hated them, but I just really felt like this is just an evil group of people.
Hmm.
All they want to do is kill Jewish people. And I didn't understand, why do they just want to kill Jewish people? But then we began to research more, and Yana began to do a lot of uncovering as well. And she's like, you know, they're just oppressed. And when she found, I think one of the big things too is when I discovered that Israel was involved in the killing of the Syrian children and women, and blamed it on Bashar al-Assad, when I discovered that it was totally false.
Yeah.
It was never is that was not Bashar al-Assad. It was actually coordinated between Israel, the United States, and ISIS militants and Turkey.
Okay. So I'm really glad you brought that up, because you're talking about a false flag event. It was the King David Hotel was another big wake up moment for me. It's like, this is just crazy that they were able to do this. And then nobody got in trouble. And then their leadership becomes the prime minister of the Likud party, Menachem Begin, after he leads this thing that kills like 90 British just to get them out. It was insane. So that was one of the bumps for me. But I have not watched this yet, but apparently Tucker Carlson or his team has just exposed another false flag that Israel's been kind of caught red-handed in here. I don't know anything about it. Do you?
I'm not aware of that as of right now. No,
Okay. I
but
should have brought
but
it up then.
nothing surprises me. I mean, I already know that the even the Saudis right now, there is a high level probability that Israel is the one that is involved in targeting Saudi oil interests and things like that, in order to try to get the Saudis to go against Iran. Now, there is a strategic reason for doing that, because you have to remember, if there is a jihad war against Israel, then even though you're Sunni or Shiite, which the Iranians are Shiites, and the rest of the Arabic world, for the most matter, other than Hezbollah, et cetera, are Sunnis. and they don't like each other. They have different doctrinal views on what Muhammad actually allegedly taught. So, nonetheless, though, when you get a war like this, then they all join together and they go and they bring down what they consider to be the bad guys, and that would be the state of Israel, uh, or the United States, or whatever else may be in that case. There, so I think they're trying to create a division to where the Saudis will not uh, be supportive of Iran whatsoever, because they don't want this turning into a bigger war to where then they can't control the outcome, so to speak. But Iran has clearly denied it. And Iran's never afraid to say, no, we targeted you because you did this or you did that.
Yeah.
Um, but they're saying, and they called them their brothers. And I actually knew about the meetings that was going on with Soleimani and the Saudi prince. I forget his name right off the top of my head. He's the very one that's very prominent now that we see, the younger prince there. I knew about all their meetings they were going on then, and that was another reason why they targeted him. I actually have the pictures from Mossad where it wasn't, Trump claimed that we blew up Soleimani's car. It wasn't us. It was actually Israel that did it.
Okay. What you mentioned Mossad right then. Did I hear you correctly earlier? And I think I heard one other pundit, or it was that Lieutenant Colonel Daniel. Forget his last name. But he said that Mossad headquarters had been bombed.
Yes, yes. That's mainly because they know where it is. I mean, it's kind of like Langley, CIA. Everybody knows where Langley is. That's
Yes.
the main base there. Yes.
So what kind? I mean, that sounds like a really big deal. Is it
Well,
not?
it is, and how Israel and the United States always say, well, especially Israel, they'll say, well, Yana made that funny statement on one of our broadcasts we were doing. I was talking about somebody that talking about this little girl they made the movie about, and how they were trying to save her life, and Israel shot more than 200 and something bullets in the car, and Yana said Hamas must have been under the car. Because the point is, well, we have to kill all these little children and stuff, and we have to kill all these families because they got an underground place in that apartment building. So, well, it's just collateral damage.
Yep.
It's the same thing but they claim that Hamas does this, but why then would Israel, in the middle of Netanya, now, by the way, Israel is a very dense populated country. We could have or I shouldn't say we, but Israel could put the Mossad headquarters somewhere out in the desert where the military bases are, away from the public. But no, they got to put it right there in the middle of all these apartment buildings. Shin Bet as well, which is like the FBI in the United States. They put their headquarters in Netanya as well. So when you go to bomb that, you're going to kill civilians. There's no way around it.
Do we know if there was a large death count of Mossad agents as a part of this?
Israel's not going to even release that information. I think the only reason we got the information about the generals that were killed was because Iranian intelligence knew that they were gathering, and they were, as they put it, they were wanting to take out the very men that were responsible for killing Khomeini. And that's why they had followed their intelligence to know where they were meeting at.
Let's touch on one of the early pendulum swing kind of feelings or ideas about this whole thing. And that is the early on this year, there was all of these protests in Iran against their own government. And I don't know quite what to think about all of it, because if you're looking at the MAGA, the right wing American news pundits, it's just like, we've got to free these people. They've been waiting for 47 years. They're so happy, if we get involved and if we, take out Khomeini. On the other hand, there's things like, and I can't believe he did this, but former CIA Director Mike Pompeo, right at the beginning of some of these protests, said, we'd like to congratulate all of the protesters and the Mossad agents that are walking beside them. And he puts that on X. And it's like, first of all, why would you say that? Because it makes it sound like less real. Like it's not an organic or grassroots type thing. So I don't understand why he would do that. But secondly, how from your perspective, how real is all this? What is the vibe of the people in Iran?
Okay, we'll step back. Mike Pompeo, he's very accurate. Mossad definitely is amongst them. Mossad is the one that armed them. Mossad is the one that gives them wants them to attack and kill police and things like that. I don't think the protesters themselves wanted to get into trying to kill Iranian Revolutionary Guard and bring a massacre upon themselves, but it did, and it did bring about a massacre. And it was Mossad incited. Now, the Iranian people, though, you have to keep in mind, the Khomeini and the predecessors before him, most of them are Turkish. They're not even Persian in the first place. They weren't part of pre 1979 when the United States overthrew them and installed this crazy radical regime to turn this into a Muslim stronghold of a country. The Iranian people are completely a different. They're more of a Western type of society, is the way they are,
Mhm.
and but that changed, and they did want freedom. In fact, my own contact always longed to see Iran liberated, but he knew that they were not strong enough to ever be able to do it upon their on their own, and he also didn't believe that you know that toppling the nation would guarantee that that would change. Now, recently, he said that there was always a backup plan. If the United States and Israel attacked and the government was overthrown and they had to flee, their place they would flee to was Venezuela because Nicolas Maduro was very close to the Iranian country. He, just like Iran, did not like Israel, did not like what they were doing to Palestinians. And quite frankly, I'll pause and say this. I think had Israel not treated Palestinians the way they did, had not tried to come in there and kill everybody in 1948, we'd have a different picture today. We'd
Mhm.
have more of a peaceful society. We wouldn't even have Iran wanting to wipe Israel off the map, so to speak. Israel's actions going against the very commandment of Moses that when you've been in bondage yourself, you know what it's like to be oppressed. Don't oppress the people when you come into the country. But nonetheless, going back though, the Iranians had the backup plan to go to Venezuela. They had invested heavily. That's why you even see, Trump when they started, taking over all these oil tankers. Iran was still investing in Venezuela as a backup plan if, in the event they needed to escape, they would go there. They were involved, though, the Revolutionary Guard, in killing a lot of these protesters. They know they have blood on their hands. They know this is a major problem. Now they have nowhere to go. So I was told yesterday they're going to fight to the death if that's what it takes. And they're going to do everything they can to make sure that they can reestablish the government one way or the other and survive this onslaught from the United States and Israel so that they can live to see another day. And he said, honestly, Steve, I don't think that the United States and Israel is going to be able to pull this off. Eventually, somewhere they're going to have to stop and the dust will have to settle. And he said, I'm afraid my people will still be in bondage as they were before the war.
Mm.
And he said, and the bad thing is right now, because of the way they're attacking Iran and they're bombing like they did over in Gaza, just leveling entire blocks and areas. He said, I've got my own family members, he said, that are being killed as a result. He said, so that takes away the joy of any possibility of freedom because we're suffering such large losses of life because he said they just don't care what they bomb.
Yeah. Yeah. I think a lot of it too is the visuals they can create for the American, media machine, political machine, just to continue to generate support for whatever Trump or Netanyahu wants. Um, do you remember Charlie Kirk spoke on this quite a bit, a lot more than I ever knew that he did before he died. He was talking about regime change wars, and he definitely had soured on that. He talked about it being maybe the biggest area where he had changed is the U.S. involvement in Middle Eastern regime change wars. And he said the problem here is what happens when we leave. And I think you're speaking to that. If you go in there and you mostly obliterate, but not completely, and now you've got, if you thought you were taking out the head of the snake, but you just kind of cut off his tail, now he's really pissed. Um, it can actually pose
Yeah.
a larger problem long term or even midterm than what you had to start with. So is that kind of what you're saying is what could happen or what is happening?
Yes, from what I understand right now, Israel and the United States are headhunting. They're looking for every possible successor to the Khomeini and making sure they kill anybody and everybody in his family that could possibly take control. Anyone that would be a successor as far as president or another leader that has been following the same mindset that the Iranian Revolutionary Guard and the current government has always had. And and of course, because they've been duped by the U.S. twice now, he said negotiations are totally off the board. They're not going to negotiate because why would they trust anybody? They know you'll kill
Well,
the
they
families
look
if
at,
you
you know
don't.
how we say you can't negotiate with terrorists. I would think in their mind, after two sucker punches where they're in the middle of negotiations and then we hit them, they're looking at us like, well, they're terrorists, right? Aren't they seeing us the same way?
Exactly. What we tend to not think about, Jeremy, is that Iranians are just like what we are, or Palestinians are just like what we are. We live in our homes, we live comfortably, we feel like we're safe, we're here in America, we've got protection. But if suddenly somebody comes in that's a foreigner into our country and they started throwing us out of our house and killing our families and say, no, by the way, your house belongs to me, or your country belongs to me, or suddenly if someone came in and wiped out the entire Washington, D.C., and took out all the leaders in this country, regardless of how much we may disagree with them politically, you would cause an uprising in this country because it's like, how dare anybody come? Okay. I may not like what they're doing, but still, this is still our president. This is still whether it be Congress or senators, there would be an outrage in this country. And what we're not thinking about, because we might show the US, they might show on CNN or Fox or whatever, these pinpoint strikes hitting this little bitty rocket launcher on the ground. We took it out, or we took out this police station. And the reason why they're doing police stations and things of that nature, they're really trying hard to kill anybody and everybody that could put up any fight against those that could take over the government and now become the new leaders.
Okay.
But the problem is some of those family members that they have may be part of that. And so now it's just like the friend of mine, it's changing his own perspective
Mm-hmm.
about how this is going, because he says, I've got family members, they're just killing them,
Yeah.
and yet we're the ones that wanted to see liberation. But he said, there's no glory in liberation when all your family is being killed in the process.
That's, to me, it's the same thing with Hamas. And if you occasionally, our senators or Congress people will be honest about the actual numbers of Hamas. And I remember reading this maybe 4 months ago. It was some senator is like, we've been speaking with Israeli intel and they say Hamas is just as many in number as they were when we started. And I'm kind of like, no shit. If you're blowing up like daughters and mothers and brothers and sons, you've just created radical, it doesn't even have to be Islamist, radical anti-Israel folks. You're just creating that because of the way you're going about it. And it's interesting how war does that. Go ahead, Stephen. Do you have something on that?
You're so right on that. Mutasim, he's a journalist in Gaza that we've interviewed him a couple of times. And in fact, we're going to be interviewing him again here before not too much longer. He was just sharing with me the other day. He said, all three of my sons are now dead. And I asked him one time about this issue with Hamas, and when they were claiming Hamas was shooting the people going to get food and it wasn't the Israeli soldiers. He said, Steve, that's totally not true. He said, what Israel did is they took some of the worst criminals that they had in their prisons over in Israel. He said, ones that we arrested, for murder and things like that against Palestinian people. And they armed them and brought them in, and they paid them to shoot our own people. He said, so when they claim it was a Hamas overtaking these food supplies, he said, no, it's actually the thugs that they hired,
Yep.
To come in. He said, and they're basically brought them in to eradicate Hamas.
And
So they're
I
just
remember
creating another faction.
I remember that happening, and I remember it confusing me because here I am trying to expose the truth about what Israel will allow on October 7th and what's really happening with Palestinians. And then, David Harris and basically every MAGA influencer online that's in my space starts posting these horrific videos of just shooting people in the head in the street. And it's like, this is Hamas. Anybody that's pro-Palestine is supporting this. And it's like, Boy, that does look really bad, like, but I
Yeah,
asked a Palestinian Christian friend of mine, and he's like, dude, do you not understand this by now? Do you not see what they are willing to do to create a visual for American media then to take it and run with it? And he explained that to me, and I was like, say that again. It's not that hard to
yeah,
figure out, but you've got to go back to that original Mossad motto of by deception, thou shalt do war. And that's
yeah.
something that they just know that we are very stupid over here.
Absolutely. And the other thing that gets me too, Jeremy, is all the Christians that have been killed in the Middle East. And I did a post on Substack one time on called the Psalm 83. And I said, yeah, the Psalm 83 is a prophecy of today. I said, but it's just the opposite of what you think. I said they're going after all those old ancient Christians that are descendants from the early apostles and the house of Israel that had already came back and were dispersed among the nations. They come from 15 nations, and now they're strong Christian strongholds. I mean, even Iran has more than 1 million Christians in that country. They don't have to live in hiding, even though they have this strange Sunni stronghold in the country. Same thing with their Jewish population. Their Jewish population refuses to go to Israel, and they serve in their own parliament there.
Hmm.
So it's not that the Iranians, I mean, yes, they are an oppressive regime. I agree with that. I know that people want to be liberated. They don't want to, women don't want to have to walk around with burqas on and things like that. And I appreciate that. And I support them in every way that I could. But this death and destruction against Christians throughout the entire Middle East, uh, it's like Israel is targeting that. They did it in Bethlehem. They destroyed the churches in Gaza. They destroyed them in Tyre over in Lebanon and any other place they can. They did it in Syria. And then they put the very guy that was the most wanted guy by the United States, they put him as president and took Bashar al-Assad out when Bashar al-Assad was the best friends Christians ever had in Syria.
It's amazing how obvious these things are. And I guess it's because Christian people in the United States really respect their leadership to a fault because their leadership tells them that it's God's chosen people. And I mean, we've both been down that road, so we know the mindset. And there's just a blindness or a quick turning away of anything that affects that worldview. Before I want to touch on one more like nuts and bolts piece of war, and then we're going to hit on some of the spiritual and prophetic things around this. What are the chances, Stephen? What is an avenue for this war to come to the United States shores? And I say that because I've got a young family, I've got boys and a wife, and when I go outside, I can still go about my job. So the U.S. is right now involved in a foreign war, but this one seems to feel different. And I know there's other players lurking that are looking at what's going on. What are the chances that it could come here, and how could that happen?
Wow. Well, the only way that I can see it coming to our shores is if Israel brings it to our shores. And I do think that they do intend on trying to bring some type of war here. And people might say, well, that just can't happen. Israel, we're their greatest ally. Even though you have, and I understand Hebrew, I know what Netanyahu said sitting in that lady's room there, and he said, turn the cameras off.
Mm-hmm.
Somebody didn't turn one camera off, right?
Yep.
And he says, Christians are just useful idiots. I sat right in Dr. Hans Dage's house in South Florida years ago when I was so pro-Zionist, and literally was part of the Chabad community for 20 years. And listen to him tell me that I don't have to worry about having to hire people to run my trucking company at the time, that we'll have 2,800 slaves each out of the goys. These are well-respected community leaders, some of the richest people in South Florida, telling me things like this, and I wasn't a poor guy when I was in business. I owned a very large company. But at the same time, I'm sitting there thinking to myself, Am I losing it? I mean, I know that I've heard this said, but I mean, are they really seriously believing that?
Yeah.
Well, you have to keep in mind this comes back to the Amalek, to the Esau question.
Yeah.
Israel believes there is a Jewish teacher online from Russia, and you'd have to just do subtitles when you follow his work there. I publish his work a lot. His name is Fink, and he's a Russian. I'll just use the word rabbi for the sake of so people can find it easier. Just look him up, and he goes in detail, and I've covered it many times. He goes into detail about the blood libel that they're making Christians pay for all the way back, right? And they're literally, he talks about the wars and like for example, Azerbaijan, when Azerbaijan they were going against the Armenians and they were killing the Armenian Christians, and how Israel put all the weapons that they needed to be able to do it. He says, why? He says, we were paying them back for something they did back in like 1700s or something.
Yeah.
And he started telling about all these blood libels. He said, this is what we're doing. This is what Israel is doing right now. He says, we are paying all these countries back for what they did to the Jewish people. Same thing with Ukraine. This was a blood libel against the Christians of both Russia and Ukraine. So they made them fight against each other so they would kill each other. And Menachem Schneerson said he gives the full details. I think it was Eduardo Hudo, a former rabbi that became a Christian later, that knew Schneerson. He was recruited as the mayor of Kharkiv, Ukraine, to be a part of the overthrow and to cause the war between Russia and the Ukrainians. And he reveals their entire playbook. He talked about Hitler coming in, I'm not Hitler, but Putin coming into power before he ever got into power. And Putin was only put there to overthrow the liberal Jews and to put in the Chabad organization. Same thing Trump is doing. Trump was there to overthrow the liberal Jews of America and put Chabad stronghold
Boy, that's a
into our
clear one.
country.
That is so clear. What about you talk about Amalek, and I know there's some other words that I can't remember off the top of my head that are linked, where it's like basically Israel's enemies or the enemies of the Jews, and it's like this eternal enemy. And they changed the names through the years, but the big one to me now is Rome. And Netanyahu talks about we're going to defeat Rome, but if it is so clear, I mean, Tovia Singer did a whole video on how America is Rome. Netanyahu said with Mike Pompeo on stage 20 feet away, America is Rome. And yet he's reading a book called The Destruction of Rome. And he's asked, why are you reading that book? He's like, well, we lost the first one. And he's talking about the Catholic Church going back hundreds of years, the Catholic Church, and then the Inquisitions and those things. And then all of Christianity and the Western world became Rome. So to me, it's just so obvious that right now, while America is a power and they need us, they can kind of milk us dry. And then once they are, what people are calling Pax Judaica, the rise of Jewish power in the Middle East, and they become a world superpower, they don't need us anymore. And they can treat us like the Rome that they see us as. That's the way I see it going. What about you?
Well, that's exactly what they're working on, and they do look at us as being Esau, even though there's no biblical soundness for what they're claiming when they say this. This is exactly what they think, and this is why they love to sound the alarm about those that bless Israel, God will bless; those that curse Israel, God will curse. Even though it doesn't say a single word like that in Genesis 12:3, it's to Abram and him alone to protect the promised seed of Sarah. That would come through his family that ultimately would be married, that would bring forth Jesus Christ. Uh, so this is what makes the Christians gullible in believing all of this, and so they're wanting to desperately bring a war against this country to make us pay, and we're just falling for that. And when you've got somebody like Mike Huckabee that's supposed to be a Baptist minister, which when Yana and I watched him with Tucker, and Tucker, you could tell Tucker was afraid, for one,
Mm-hmm.
even though he may have not admitted it, he was afraid. The man chartered a plane, never chartered a plane before, trying to get permission to be able to land in Israel, make sure the Israelis know so they don't shoot him down like he's some, illegal drone coming into the country.
Yeah,
And he
Tucker
was afraid.
was very apologetic about anything he might have done or said to offend Huckabee in the past. And there was just this, you could tell on the one hand, he was angry about what America's involvement. On the other hand, he did seem afraid, and he seemed like he had to cover all the bases with what he needed to say to sound like a really nice guy.
He did, and it's almost like Mike Huckabee knew that he had him. He knew how he had him on his turf, and he could pretty much make him concede a lot of things. And of course, they, as Tucker says before then, he said, I normally don't do this, but the backstory is kind of important on this here. And I think that Tucker wanted that to be known, to let people
Yep.
see that, and I know how Israel is. For me, it was easy to come and go because of my last name. I have what's considered a very old Jewish name. And but other people I would watch, they get drug into a room, strip searched, everything else, and they're just tourists, right? I know how they grill people in the airport. I know how they take your phones, your computers, and things like that. And sometimes they don't go with you. They stay in their custody while they disassemble it, or they check every single thing you did. And it is a very intimidating way that they do it. And of course, back in the old days, I always figured, well, it makes the flight a lot safer. You don't have to worry about somebody getting on a plane with a bomb and blowing the whole thing up while we're traveling. That this is how fearful you were of Palestinians that are deciding to blow up an Israeli plane instead. But Tucker was genuinely fearful for his life. And I think that's why he was so apologetic, like you said.
Yeah. Yeah. And I interrupted you because you were in the middle of a longer point there, and I brought up Tucker's fear, or I kind of expounded on it. Was there something else you wanted to say about the previous point?
Are we talking about the bless Israel part? I don't know if
That
that's
or
what we were on.
the Rome piece, or we could just move on at this point. I've
You
got,
can move on. Yeah, that'd
okay.
be easier
Yeah,
probably.
let's go ahead. All right. So if you feel like this connects, let's talk about it. So you talked recently about the book of Joel and what it was talking about with the land of Israel, and how that actually refers more to the people. And I never really heard this before. Do you mind getting into that?
Not at all. Not at all. Joel, by the way, in it's kind of confusing when we look at the book of Joel, because when I say confusing, it's the chapters. In the King James Version Bible of Joel, chapter 2 is where we begin at the bottom part of chapter 2 on Joel, and then it goes into chapter 3. In the Masoretic version of the Hebrew version of Joel, that's laid out a little differently. They actually have 4 chapters. It's still the exact same books, but it's just the way they kind of make everything fall on their side of it. And I always kind of thought that was interesting. But if you actually read, let's say if we take it from the King James Version, and you shall know that I am in the midst of Israel, that I am the Lord your God, and it shall come to pass afterward, I'll pour out my spirit upon all flesh, and your sons and your daughters shall prophesy, right? We know that this is actually quoted in the book of Acts as a fulfillment that was taking place there. So my question and my argument is then, we see the wonders in heaven. The sun is turned to darkness. We know that the sun goes down at the crucifixion of Christ. We know it's kind of like backwards of the way the prophecy is laid out, because when it's talking about they will prophesy and stuff, that's 50 days after the resurrection. That's on the day of Pentecost. That's being fulfilled. But yet we know all these signs in the heavens were also taking place. Why is it then that suddenly then when you go into chapter 3 and we get to this part here, that suddenly we decide, oh, this is for a future day?
Tell me which
When
verse.
it clearly,
Go to it when you're, which verse?
that's actually in Joel chapter 3, verse 1.
Okay.
Or actually, verse 2 is where we'd get.
All
I
right.
will also gather all nations and will bring them down to the valley of Jehoshaphat, and will plead with them there for my people and for my heritage Israel, whom they have scattered among the nations and parted my land. Now,
All right, guys. So I've been taking a walk around the neighborhood, listening to this interview and watching you guys' comments on YouTube specifically. Thank you, guys. Thank you for your support. Let me turn that off real quick. And wow, this is different. Actually, having YouTube not censor me and not kick me off, I'm telling you guys, it has been an incredible journey and ride. I was kicked off YouTube back in 2021, the moment I started speaking against COVID and election integrity and all that stuff. But anyway, we're way down the road. and I've learned so much. And thank you guys. Just thank you for your support. And you can hear the rest of this conversation where Steven Ben-Nun is going to get deep into the books of the Bible and the prophetic voices talking about different events that are already fulfilled, as well as a few that are not yet fulfilled, and how that relates to what we're watching today. And I can tell you, it's going to be very different than what you will hear from the big evangelical megachurches. All right. By the way, did you guys see? There was a meme that came out, and I think the meme is based on reality, from what I can tell. I don't have any source material yet because I've not had time to look into it. But apparently, like 30 commanders or whatever people with authority with the U.S. military came out to their troops and told them that what we are doing in Iran and with this war is meant to be the spark to set forth basically dispensational Zionist theology to kick off. They didn't say the word rapture, but the second coming. Maybe a little bit slightly different than that, but I'm when I first saw that, I just said, okay, so all the military, generals and commanders went from being massively woke and LGBTQ sponsors, out the ass, to now being massive Christian dispensational Zionists. It's just freaking weird. Anyway, guys, I do appreciate your support very much. I've got to go to bed, and thank you. Thank you for following. This is the most live concurrent viewers I've ever had on YouTube, at least. So I'm amazed they're not censoring. I have a theory around that, which I'll share just right now, real quick. I do believe that those folks, mostly of a certain people group around the world, very small people group that I might discuss kind of often, happens to hold the keys and the levers to all of the surveillance. I don't know what the wrong word is, equipment. What's the word? They hold the levers of power when it comes to AI, surveillance, and everything associated with that. Just look up, Sam Altman, and now Peter Thiel's a little bit not of that people group, but definitely supplies his materials and his platforms to the IDF. Larry Ellison, Facebook, Mark Zuckerberg, and others. I think they're taking notes. I think they're like, let's let them talk. Let's let guys like J Slay USA speak, and let's write down, not by pen, but by digital intelligence. Let's remember what they're saying. And I think they're making their own list right now. But I do know this: if enough of us are speaking loudly, boldly, and clearly on these topics, there ain't nothing they can do. You get up over 100 million people that all know the same thing, good luck. So with that, I send you to jslayusa.com. Watch the rest of this interview, sign up, please support me. Okay. If you can, find it in your heart. jslayusa.com. You can be a paid subscriber for $15 a month, or for, I believe it is $100 for the whole year. You'll get everything I put out early. And some of the things I put out will only be for you. And a lot of that is my private thoughts on various issues going on, and also some writings that don't go anywhere else except for Substack to paid subscribers. So that being said, God bless you, and keep me in your prayers. I will keep you in mind. Thank you so much for all that you're doing, and have a great night.